Good evening, everyone. I am tasked to report about postmodern literature. So let's start our discussion with the etymology. Postmodernism is composed by two parts, which is the post and modernism. Post is the Latin for after, and modernism refers to the modern period. So technically, postmodernism means the era or time period after modernism. Now, what is meant by the term postmodernism? Postmodernism is a number of trends or movements in the arts and literature developing in the 1970s in reaction to or rejection of the dogma principles or practices of established modernism, especially a movement in architecture and influence of the international styles and encouraging the use of elements from historical informal styles and often playful illusion, decoration, and complexity. Now, the history of postmodernism dates back to the mid of 20th century when it actually started to develop. The term was first used around the 1870s in various areas, and the 2 decades, particularly 1970s and 1980s, marked the development of postmodern forms in literature, poetry, painting, and architecture. Postmodernism is a reaction to the aesthetic modernism which emerged just after World War II. And the strength of unification and dying thought of objectivity brought this era. Now, what is postmodern literature? Postmodern literature is a form of literature which is marked both stylistically and ideologically. It is characterized by heavy reliance on techniques like fragmentation, paradox, and questionable narrators, and is often unrealistic and downright impossible plots, games, parody, paranoia, dark humor, and authorial self-reference, which often thematizes both historical and political issues. It is also often defined as the style or trend which emerged in the post-World War II era. And postmodern works are seen as a reaction against Enlightenment thinking and modernist approaches to literature. Originally, postmodernism is a reaction to modernism, referring to the lack of artistic, intellectual, or cultural thought or organized principles. It started around 1940s, but the exact date is unknown. It peaked around 1960s to 1970s. Postmodernism also rejects the boundaries between high and low forms of art and literature, as well as the distinction between different genres and forms of writing and storytelling. Now let's move on to the 5 characteristics of postmodern literature. Postmodern literature builds on the following core ideas. First, it embraces randomness and disorder. Postmodern works reject the idea of absolute meaning and instead embrace postmodern novels that often employed unreliable narrators to further muddy the waters with extreme subjectivity and prevent readers from finding meaning during the story. Next is playfulness. While modernist writers mourn for the loss of order, the postmodern writers revel in it, often using tools like black humor, wordplay, irony, and other techniques of playfulness to dizzy readers and muddle the story. Next is fragmentation. It is a combination of different elements to create something new. Postmodernist literature took modernism's fragmentation and expanded on it, moving literary works more towards collage-style forms, temporal distortion, and significant jumps in character and place. Next is metafiction. It is the act of writing about writing or making readers aware of the fictional nature of the very fiction they are reading. Postmodern literature emphasized meaninglessness and play. Postmodern writers began to experiment with more meta-elements in their novels and short stories, drawing attention to their work artifice and reminding readers that the author isn't an authority figure. Lastly, intertextuality. It is the acknowledgement of previous literary works within another literary work. As a form of collage-style writing, many postmodern authors wrote their work overtly in dialogue with other texts. The techniques they employed included pastiche, or the imitation of other author styles, and the combination of high and low culture, which writing that tackle subjects that were previously considered inappropriate for literature. Many scholars and critics find it best to define postmodern literature against the popular literary style that came before it, which is modernism. In many ways, postmodernism literary styles and ideas serve to dispute, reverse, mock, and reject the principles of the modernist literature. Now let's have here the postmodernist writers. So there are a lot of postmodernist writers, so I just pick 5 of them. We have here George Louis Borge, Kurt Vonnegut, Jan Simmons Barth, Thomas Ruggles Pynchon Jr., and Grace Paley. So George Louis Borge. Borge is one of the postmodernist earliest writers, and his writing are almost exclusively in short stories. He explored philosophical ideas and the boundaries of time and space, all without leaving the readers with any sense of key theme or meaning. One of his famous work is the story entitled Library of Babel in 1941. It is a short story that describes a library full of everything that has been and will ever be written. Next, we have here Kurt Vonnegut. Vonnegut might be one of postmodern literature's most recognizable authors. His work explored the counterculture movement, state oppression, and war. He frequently employed satire, irony, and dark humor in his stories. One of his well-known work is the 1969 book entitled Slaughterhouse-Five. Slaughterhouse-Five is an obscure tale of aliens, time travel, and World War II. Next is John Barth, or John Simmons Barth in full. He is an American writer born on May 27, 1930. He is best known for novels that combine philosophical depth and complexity with biting satire and boisterous, frequently bawdy humor. Much of Barth's work's writing is concerned with the seeming impossibility of choosing the right action in a world that has no absolute values. Barth also published several volumes of essays and other nonfiction. This included The Friday Book, Further Fridays, Final Fridays, and The Satwid Factor. Next is Thomas Ruggles Pynchon Jr. He is an American novelist born on May 8, 1937, and he is a MacArthur Fellow. He is noted for his dense and complex novels. His fiction and nonfiction writing encompassed a vast array of subject matter, genres, and themes, including history, music, science, and mathematics. He began composing the novels which he is best known for, which is The V, The Crying of Lot 49, and Gravity's Rainbow. The Crying of Lot 49 is a perfect example of playfulness. In this novel, the protagonist's quest for knowledge and understanding, which results ultimately in confusion and the lack of any sort of clear understanding of events that transpired. And as for Gravity's Rainbow, Pynchon won the 1973 U.S. National Book Award for Fiction. Lastly, we have here Grace Paley. She was born on December 11, 1922 and died on August 22, 2007. She was an American short story author, poet, teacher, and political activist. 3 of her critically acclaimed collections of short stories were compiled in the Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award finalists, which is the Collected Stories in 1994. So I have here one of Paley's work, which is a short story entitled A Conversation with My Father. So allow me to read to you its overview. The story is about an unnamed woman, who is also the narrator, visiting her father in his deathbed. The woman is a writer, but her father never appreciated her writing styles and criticized her. When her father asks her to write a simple story, she attempts to please him even though she does not enjoy it. The important part about the story is the storytelling. Apart from the main story, there is also the story the narrator writes for her father. The narrator's story is about a woman and her son. It deals with heroin addiction and the relationship between a mother and a son. The father of the narrator seems to disagree on many points and forces her to change them. In the end, the woman in the story recovers from addiction and starts helping people like her. The father now says that she will eventually go back to her old habits. The woman disagrees by saying that it does not matter since the story ends there. So we can deduce that A Conversation with My Father is a story within a story, which is the story of the narrator and the story that she writes for her father. That would be all for the postmodern literature. Thank you for listening and good evening.